citizens, I will be honored to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
Who is Sarah Heath? She's you, and she's me. She's the woman down the street and the guy in the next state over. She embodies the hopes and dreams of each and every one of us. And just like you and I, she was born with a silver spoon in her mouth. That spoon is called the United States of America. And if you weren't born with that spoon, you probably worked long and hard for it until you became an American citizen. Ever heard of Sandpoint, Idaho? Sarah has, because that's where she was born back in 1964. And soon thereafter, piled into the family car with Dad Charles and Mom Sally and headed off for Alaska, where Dad would be a science teacher and track coach. It was not exactly, however, a typical upbringing. Although most of us dearly love the outdoors, I don't expect many of us were awakened at 3 a.m. to hunt moose before going to school. But Sarah had the right stuff. She was captain of the Wasilla High School women's basketball team that won the Alaska Small School Championship in 1982. She finished that game with a small fracture in her ankle. Any wonder they call her Barracuda? She had other youthful accomplishments as well. She was Miss Wasilla in 1984, then finished second in the Miss Alaska pageant. A few years later, the University of Idaho gave her a bachelor's degree in journalism with a minor in politics. It was then that Wasilla lured her back home. Todd Palin helped a little. That's when the two of them eloped, and the Heath turned into a Palin. You see, he was her high school sweetheart. And after all, who could resist a commercial fisherman who could teach her to fish the frigid, icy Alaskan waters? Can't imagine how any woman could turn that down, but I guess they were compatible. They have 5 children. Trigg is 18 and headed soon with the Army to Iraq. Daughters Bristol, 17, Willow, 13, and Piper, 7, are sandwiched in the middle. Son Trigg arrived in April of this year. He has Down syndrome. But Sarah said, "I'm looking at him right now, and I see perfection." Seems to me that just about says it all about her character. She still eats moose burgers, ice fishes, rides snowmobiles, and has a lifetime membership in the NRA. But what about Sarah's political acumen? Well, she served 2 terms on the Wasilla City Council. Then she whooped the incumbent mayor by criticizing wasteful spending and high taxes. Sounds a little like Washington. A recall campaign failed. Then Sarah went on to cut her own salary and reduce city property taxes by 60%. The former mayor ran against her in a re-election bid. She beat him worse than the first time. It's also worthwhile noting that Sarah was elected president of the Alaska Conference of Mayors. Sarah understands the vagaries of politics. In 2002, she failed in her bid to become Alaska Lieutenant Governor. When Alaskan Senator Frank Murkowski resigned, Sarah interviewed to become his possible successor. What a surprise when Murkowski appointed his own daughter. That, of course, was the only ethical thing to do. But there was an upside. The new Murkowski appointed Sarah Ethics Commissioner of the Alaska Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. She later resigned over what she said were a lack of ethics by fellow Alaskan Republican leaders. They didn't like her whistleblowing over legal violations and conflicts of interest. She then went after the state's Republican Party chairman. She accused Randy Rodich of doing work for the party on public time and giving lobbyists sensitive emails. Former Alaska Attorney General Rehnquist was also in her sights. They both resigned. Rodich paid a record $12,000 fine. But the saga of success was far from over. In 2006, she decided to run for governor on a clean government platform. she defeated Republican Governor Murkowski in the Republican primary. But what about the general election? She had little, if any, support from GOP party leaders. And despite being outspent by the Democratic opponent, she was elected governor in November of that year. It was an historic moment. Sarah Palin became the first woman governor of Alaska, also the youngest ever at age 42. She was the first Alaskan governor after that state had achieved statehood, and she was the first Alaskan governor to be inaugurated outside of Juneau. She opted for Fairbanks instead. Then it was time to really go to work, with her independent genes going full speed ahead. She began efforts to address climate change and cut greenhouse gas emissions. She rescinded 35 appointments by her predecessor. In 2008, Palin introduced a bill to allow the building of a natural gas pipeline from the North Slope. It passed overwhelmingly. The state budget also had a surplus. Now, what government programs could she institute with that extra money? She decided that the best place for the people's money was in their pockets. So she proposed to send each Alaskan $1,200 directly and eliminate the gas tax. There is a litany of conservative actions by Governor Palin. To name just a few more, she sold the state's executive jet, canceled a contract to construct an 11-mile gravel road outside Juneau to a mine, signed into law a $6.6 billion operating budget, then went on to make the second biggest cut of the construction budget in the state's history. And what about the much ballyhooed dismissal of the Commissioner of Public Safety, Walter Monaghan? A lot of charges continue to fly back and forth. Yeah. It is now under an investigation, being overseen by State Senator Hollis French. He's a Democrat. And it's unlikely anything will be accomplished until after the November elections. But now is the question, where does all this lead? A senator is responsible for running a senatorial office. A governor is responsible for running the equivalent of a small country. Now, which one would you choose?
Don't you think we made the right choice for the next Vice President of the United States?